and defense attorney Shan Wu. Thanks so much to both of you for being with us. Ariva, let me start with you first. The prosecutor said this is about the facts, not whether the defendants are good or bad people. How effective was that closing argument in your view?
Jim, I thought the prosecutor's closing argument, both her initial argument and her rebuttal, were masterful. Actually, a class in how to do a closing argument, powerful, persuasive, logical. And one thing she did really well was to make her arguments plain, make them simple, and make them relatable for this jury. And saying that this isn't about whether someone's good or bad, I thought was important, particularly in light of what we saw yesterday with Laura Hogue, the attorney for Greg McMichael. She tried to ingratiate herself to the jury by telling stories of her father being an insurance salesman. And then she went on attack on Ahmaud, accusing him of being some kind of nefarious individual that was in this neighborhood where he didn't belong. And I thought what we saw today by the lead prosecutor was, her letting this jury know that indeed it's the narrative that she's been putting forth and the evidence that is what should resonate with this jury. And I just think she did an outstanding job of really shooting down this theory that there was some reliance on citizen's arrest, or even that law, that affirmative defense applies in this case. She made it very clear that these defendants had no immediate knowledge of a crime being committed. No crime occurred in their presence. Therefore, citizen's arrest doesn't apply. And if you don't have citizen's arrest, you don't get to self-defense.
And Shan, this jury has to consider three different men, three different roles in the killing, each facing 9 charges. We have them up on the screen right now. How complicated are these deliberations, having to sort through all of that?
They could be complicated, Jim, but I agree with Ariva. The prosecutor's done a very good job at making it very simple for the jury. She talked about how to use the verdict form to start with the underlying felonies, which is what you need to find to get you to felony murder. So I think even though there are 3 different defendants, query the wisdom of defendants in choosing to be tried together, because there's a certain atmospheric taint to that. But even though there are 3 different defendants with 3 different roles, I think she has spelled out quite easily how the evidence goes to each person, and the idea that, like her bank robbery analogy, a lookout person is just as guilty of the shooting that may go on inside the bank as the shooter is. So I think she's done a good job with that, and I think the case has gone in well for the prosecution. I wouldn't expect this to be a long verdict, and you'll also have the added pressure of a holiday. That jury's working through lunch. They're anxious to get at it.
And Ariva, do we expect lengthy deliberations? What do you think?
I don't think so. I agree with Shan. I think, these jurors are they're humans. They have families. They have big dinners that they want to get to. I would expect them to go as late as they can today, maybe past 6 or 7 o'clock. And if they don't come to a decision by this evening, to be back in court early tomorrow morning. But I would be surprised if they go past 5 or 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. Now, the court has said that if they don't reach a decision by tomorrow, he will give them Thanksgiving off, but they will be back in court on Friday. And knowing what I know about jurors, if there is agreement that can be reached, it's likely to be done tomorrow rather than on Friday or thereafter.
Yeah, and Shan, speaking of the jury and the makeup of the jury, 11 white jurors, 1 African-American juror. At the end of the day, what is your sense as to whether or not this is going to make a difference?
Yeah, I think it was a big strategy question, I think, for the prosecution as to how much weight to give that. I and others have been critical that they didn't raise race as a motive for the murders, but I think the prosecutor has done a good job with that. I thought it was very, very powerful evidence in her closing. She mentioned that 911 tape, what is your emergency? It's a black man running down the street. And I really think that may have been enough to do it. I think as a prosecutor, you have to be careful about worrying so much about a jury possibly being biased that you start to tailor your case towards that. I think you have to trust in the jury. You picked them wanting them to be fair. I don't think you can try your case assuming that you have a bunch of racists on the jury that aren't going to convict. You have to put in your evidence the best way you can. So, 20/20 hindsight, if it doesn't work out well, we'll be wondering maybe there should have been more evidence about the racial animus. But at this point, I think they've done a solid job.
And Ariva, your thoughts, because, it seemed at times, obviously the members of the defense team were trying to push people's buttons with some of these dog whistles that we heard during the trial. What do you think?
Yeah, Jim, we heard a lot of dog whistles. We don't want any black pastors in the courtroom, and this is akin to a public lynching. Those kinds of statements were clearly dog whistle, racist statements. I agree with Shan, though. The prosecution had a decision to make. You're in Georgia. You're not in New York. You're not in Los Angeles. And the way, the issues of race may play out in bigger cities isn't necessarily the way it plays out in a small community in Georgia. And we have to keep in mind there are federal hate crimes that all three of these defendants face as well. So the Confederate flag that was on the truck, the racial epithets that we have heard were made by one of the defendants. If there is not, and even if there is, guilty verdicts in the state case, we know we're going to see a case played out in federal court that will expose all of the issues of racial animus. I think the prosecution made a good call to be measured in how she talked about race. She made it clear enough that there was no reason for this man to be chased other than the fact that he was a black man. I think that resonated with the jurors without having to beat it over the head over and over again. There was enough evidence, I think, to convict with the amount of evidence on race that has been presented by the prosecution.
All right, Shan Wu, Reva Martin, thanks so much for those perspectives. We appreciate it.
Good to see you.